Well, one Washington resident having no trouble getting back to the nation's capital to continue those fiscal cliff talks, the president. Of course, it helps when you have your own airplane. The president arrived at Andrews Air Force Base just moments ago, en route to the White House. This, as a new poll out shows Americans are growing less optimistic that our leaders are going to reach some kind of deal to avoid a fiscal cliff. Take a look at this new Gallup poll. It finds that half of Americans believe lawmakers will come to some agreement. That's down from 58% from just a few weeks ago. Amos Snead is former press secretary for former House Republican whip Ray Blunt. Doug Thornell, former communications director for Congressman Chris Van Hollen. They're going to give us our fair and balanced debate today. Doug, essentially, John Boehner has said, look, we tried to get something. We got part of a deal out of the House of Representatives. It's now up to the democratically led Senate and the Democratic president to come up with some kind of plan we can all vote on. How do you respond to that?
I mean, I think that's kind of ridiculous. Everyone knows that if the president made a deal with Harry Reid, it wouldn't go anywhere in the House. I mean, John Boehner couldn't even pass his plan in the House. And that was something that was worked up by him and Eric Cantor and others. So the real test here, and I think the challenge, is the president and John Boehner sitting down again over the next 3 or 4 days. I think we actually have a few more days. We go over the cliff on the 1st, but the new Congress isn't sworn in until January 3rd. So, and I think that if they can work out, maybe it's just a small deal now. Maybe it's some down payments on cuts. Maybe it's certainly protecting the tax cuts for the middle class and small businesses, and doing, a few things to Medicare. And then that gets us into next year where we can do big stuff like corporate tax reform and larger reforms to the tax code.
Amos, what do you think about that proposal?
Well, I think, that proposal, the whole situation is telling. We didn't have to be here. We all saw this coming for months. We knew it was coming. And Doug's right. House Republicans did act. They act to stop the defense cuts and stop the tax hikes. What's happened since then, Senate Democrats have done nothing with it. And I think President Obama, Senator Reid, they have to bear some responsibility here that they haven't moved any of this House-passed legislation. And it's time for President Obama and Senator Reid to act.
Well, John, actually, just one thing on Amos's piece. Actually, the Senate did pass a bill which protected folks making $250 and less and small businesses from a tax increase. That is collecting dust in the House right now.
Well, Doug, let me throw it back at you, because this is the same Senate that hasn't passed a budget in 3 years. Even the president's budget got no votes in the Senate the last time around. How can they lay all of the blame at the feet of the House of Representatives?
I would say, look, I think everyone has shares in the blame in what's going on here, but I do think that what you're seeing on the House is almost a reluctance to take yes for an answer. I mean, the president has put forward a plan which would result in about $2 trillion in total spending cuts, protecting tax cuts for the middle class and small businesses, 98% of individuals, 97% of small businesses. He's talked about doing some entitlement reform. If I was a Republican, I would say, you know what, that's good, that's perfect, I'll take it. That's some stuff that they've been working on for years, and they weren't able to accomplish it under George Bush. I just feel like the president has bent. He has worked and tried to compromise with John Boehner, and John Boehner, I think, has too as well, but he's got 80, 90 House Republicans who are just unwilling to do anything on tax rates for the rich.
All right, Amos, how do you respond, or how should John Boehner respond?
I really do like Doug, but I think what he's saying is a little bit ridiculous. You know, House Republicans have acted, and there's no reason for them to bring everybody back to D.C. right now, because there's still legislation pending in the Senate that can't be brought up. So I think the next few days, what we should really be watching for is some leadership from President Obama, some leadership from Harry Reid in the Senate, and then I think we can maybe work a deal out. But I do agree with Doug that everyone shares a little bit of the blame here, but I think right now we should be paying attention to the Senate and seeing if Senate Democrats will actually act.
Doug, you used an interesting turn of phrase in your last answer. You said the president has talked about doing some entitlement reforms. Doesn't everybody in Washington acknowledge that entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, so forth, are the big drivers of our nation's debt problem and are going to have to be tackled seriously?
Well, Republicans ran millions and millions of dollars of ads against Democrats when we actually did reform Medicare as part of the Affordable Care Act. We saved about $715 billion, and that was a talking point for Republicans over the last election. So getting lectures from Republicans on doing something on Medicare is kind of ridiculous when the only thing that they've done on Medicare is actually broaden a prescription drug plan over the last 10 years and made it bigger.
All right, Amos, what's your response?
What I would think would be the best to happen for the Senate Democrats to actually ask, and then we could spend 2013 talking about corporate tax reform, increased government efficiency, lower government spending. But instead, we've waited for Harry Reid and the Democrats to act, and now we're up at this last-minute situation that I think could have been totally avoided.
All right.
Well, but I think, Amos, you know, we weren't waiting on Harry Reid. We were waiting on John Boehner, who was trying to push this gimmick Plan B plan through. So I think that should be acknowledged there.
All right. We're going to have to leave the discussion there. The fiscal cliff grows ever closer. Are we going over it? We'll see. Doug Thornell, Amos Snead, thank you both for being with us.
Happy holidays.
Thanks.
Parts of the southern part of this country cleaning up from deadly Christmas Day tornadoes, and one church is finally starting to rebuild more than a year and a half after a huge twister. And